For anybody listening at home, we're entering chapter 8 of Tagore's The Religion of Man, and this chapter is titled The Music Maker. We'll, like usual, read probably 2 chapters, in between have some brief discussion or a long discussion, depending on how inspired we are, and go from there. I don't think much more needs to be said. We just need a volunteer to read chapter 8.
Okay, I'll volunteer. I'll start.
All right, Jerry is going to test run his new microphone for the first time.
Mic. Yes.
Yeah, inaugural reading.
Now that I figured out how to turn it on. This fancy electronics is got to catch up. Okay, should I start now?
Sure.
Okay. Chapter 8, The Music Maker. A particle of sand would be nothing if it did not have its background in the whole physical world. This grain of sand is known in its context of the universe, where we know all things through the testimony of our senses. When I say the grain of sand is, the whole physical world stands guarantee for the truth, which is behind the appearance of the sand. But where is that guarantee of truth for this personality of mine that has the mysterious faculty of knowledge before which the particle of sand offers its credential of identification? It must be acknowledged that this personal self of mine also has for its truth a background of personality, where knowledge, unlike that of other things, can only be immediate and self-revealed. What I mean by personality is a self-conscious principle of transcendental unity within man, which comprehends all the details of facts that are individually his in knowledge and feeling, wish and will and work. In its negative aspect, it is limited to the individual separateness, while in its positive aspect, it ever extends itself in the infinite through the increase of its knowledge, love, and activities. And for this reason, the most human of all facts about us is that we do dream of the limitless unattained, the dream which gives character to what is attained. Of all creatures, man lives in an endless future. Our present is only a part of it. The ideas unborn, the unbodied spirits, tease our imagination with an insistence which makes them more real to our mind than things around us. The atmosphere of the future must always surround our present in order to make it life-bearing and suggestive of immortality. For he who has the healthy vigor of humanity in him has a strong instinctive faith that ideally he is limitless. That is why our greatest teachers claim from us a manifestation that touches the infinite. In this, they pay homage to the supreme man, and our true worship lies in our indomitable courage to be great, and thus to represent the human divine, and ever to keep open the path of freedom towards the unattained. We Indians have had the sad experience in our own part of the world how timid orthodoxy, its irrational repressions, and its accumulation of dead centuries dwarfs man through its idolatry of the past. Seated rigid in the center of stagnation, It firmly ties the human spirit to the revolving wheels of habit till faintness overwhelms her. Like a sluggish stream choked by rotting weeds, it is divided into shallow, slimy pools that shroud their dumbness in a narcotic mist of stupor. This mechanical spirit of tradition is essentially materialistic. It is blindly pious, but not spiritual, obsessed by phantoms of unreason that haunt feeble minds in the ghastly disguise of religion. For our soul is shrunken when we allow foolish days to weave repeated patterns of unmeaning meshes round all departments of life. It becomes stunted when we have no object of profound interest, no prospect of heightened life, demanding clarity of mind and heroic attention to maintain and mature it. It is destroyed when we make fireworks of our animal passions for the enjoyment of their meteoric sensations, recklessly reducing to ashes all that could have been saved for permanent illumination. This happens not only to mediocre individuals hugging fetters that keep them irresponsible or hungering for lurid unrealities, but to generations of insipid races that have lost all emphasis of significance in themselves, having missed their future. The continuous future is the domain of our millennium, which is with us more truly than what we see in our history, in fragments of the present. It is in our dream. It is in the realm of the faith which creates perfection. We have seen the records of man's dream of the millennium, the ideal reality cherished by forgotten races in their admiration, hope, and love, manifested in the dignity of their being through some majesty in ideals and beauty in performance. While these races pass away one after another, they leave great accomplishments behind them, carrying their claim to recognition as dreamers, not so much as conquerors of earthly kingdoms, but as the designers of paradise. The poet gives us the best definition of man when he says, "We are the music makers. We are the dreamers of dreams." Our religious present for us, the dreams of the ideal unity, which is man himself as he manifests the infinite. We suffer from the sense of sin, which is the sense of discord, when any disruptive passion tears gaps in our vision of the one in man, creating isolation in ourself from the universal humanity. The Upanishad says, "Ma grida," covet not, for coveting diverts attention from the infinite value of our personality to the temptation of materials. Our village poet sings, "Man will brightly flash into your sight, my heart, if you shut the door of desires." We have seen how primitive man was occupied with his physical needs, and thus restricted himself to the present, which is the time boundary of the animal. And he missed the urge of his consciousness to seek its emancipation in a world of ultimate human value. Modern civilization, for the same reason, seems to turn itself back to that primitive mentality. Our needs have multiplied so furiously fast that we have lost our leisure for the deeper realization of ourself and our faith in it. It means that we have lost our religion, the longing for the touch of the divine in man, the builder of the heaven, the music maker, the dreamer of dreams. This has made it easy to tear into shreds our faith in the perfection of the human ideal, in its wholeness, as the fuller meaning of reality. No doubt it is wonderful that music contains a fact which has been analyzed and measured, and which music shares in common with the braying of an ass or of a motor car horn. But it is still more wonderful that music has a truth which cannot be analyzed into fractions. And there the difference between it and the bellowing impertinence of a motor car horn is infinite. Men of our own times have analyzed the human mind, its dreams, its spiritual aspirations, most often caught unawares in the shattered state of madness, disease, and desultory dreams. And they have found to their satisfaction that these are composed of elemental animalities tangled into various knots. This may be an important discovery, but what is still more important to realize is the fact that by some miracle of creation, man infinitely transcends the component parts of his own character. Suppose that some psychological explorer suspects that man's devotion to his beloved has at bottom our primitive stomach's hankering for human flesh. We need not contradict him, for whatever may be its genealogy, its secret composition, the complete character of our love in its perfect mingling of physical, mental, and spiritual associations is unique in its utter difference from cannibalism. The truth underlying the possibility of such transmutation is the truth of our religion. A lotus has in common with a piece of rotten flesh the elements of carbon and hydrogen. In a state of dissolution, there is no difference between them. But in a state of creation, the difference is immense. And it is that difference which really matters. We are told that some of our most sacred sentiments hold hidden in them instincts contrary to what these sentiments profess to be. Such disclosures have the effect upon certain persons of the relief of attention, even like the relaxation in death of the incessant strenuousness of life. We find in modern literature that something like a chuckle of an exultant disillusionment is becoming contagious. And the knights errant of the cult of arson are abroad, setting fire to our time-honored altars of worship, proclaiming that the images enshrined in them, even if beautiful, are made of mud. They say that it has been found out that the appearances in human idealism are deceptive, that the underlying mud is real. From such a point of view, the whole of creation may be said to be a gigantic deception, and the billions of revolving electric specks that have the appearance of you or me should be condemned as bearers of false evidence. . But whom do they seek to delude? if it be beings like ourselves who possess some inborn criterion of the real, then to them these very appearances in their integrity must represent reality and not their component electric specks. For them, the rose must be more satisfactory as an object than its constituent gases, which can be tortured to speak against the evident identity of the rose. The rose, even like the human sentiment of goodness or ideal of beauty, belongs to the realm of creation, in which all its rebellious elements are reconciled in a perfect harmony. Because these elements, in their simplicity, yield themselves to our scrutiny, we, in our pride, are inclined to give them the best prizes as actors in that mystery play, The Rose. Such an analysis is really only giving a prize to our own detective cleverness. I repeat again that the sentiments and ideals which man, in his process of self-creation, has built up should be recognized in their wholeness. In all our faculties or passions, there is nothing which is absolutely good or bad. They are all the constituents of the great human personality. They are notes that are wrong when in wrong places. Our education is to make them into chords that may harmonize with the grand music of man. The animal in the savage has been transformed into higher stages in the civilized man. In other words, has attained a truer consonance with man the divine, not through any elimination of the original materials, but through a magical grouping of them, through the severe discipline of art, the discipline of curbing and stressing in proper places, establishing a balance of lights and shadows in the background and foreground, and thus imparting a unique value to our personality in all its completeness. So long as we have faith in this value, our energy is steadily sustained in its creative activity that reveals the eternal man. This faith is helped on all sides by literature, arts, legends, symbols, ceremonials, by the remembrance of heroic souls who have personified it in themselves. Our religion is the inner principle that comprehends these endeavors and expressions and dreams through which we approach him in whose image we are made. To keep alive our faith in the reality of the ideal perfection is the function of civilization, which is mainly formed of sentiments and the images that represent that ideal. In other words, civilization is a creation of art, created for the objective realization of our vision of the spiritually perfect. Wow. It is the product of the art of religion. We stop its course of conquest when we accept the cult of realism and forget that realism is the worst form of untruth because it contains a minimum of truth. It is like preaching that only in the morgue can we comprehend the reality of the human body, the body which has its perfect revelation when seen in life. All great human facts are surrounded by an immense atmosphere of expectation. They are never complete if we leave out from them what might be, what should be, what is not yet proven but profoundly felt, what points towards the immortal. This dwells in a perpetual surplus in the individual that transcends all the desultory facts about him. The realism in man is the animal in him, whose life is a mere duration of time. The human in him is his reality, which has life everlasting for its background. Rocks and crystals, being complete definitely in what they are, can keep as mute insensate things, a kind of dumb dignity in their stolidly limited realism, while human facts grow unseemly and diseased, breeding germs of death when divested of their creative ideal, the ideal of man, the divine. The difference between the notes as mere facts of sound and music as a truth of expression is immense. For music, though it comprehends a limited number of notes, yet represents the infinite. It is for man to produce the music of the spirit with all the notes which he has in his psychology, and which, through inattention or perversity, can easily be translated into a frightful noise. In music, man is revealed, and not in a noise. Interesting.
Yeah. I just wanted to add that it's good to keep in mind as well that he's speaking this as a lecture between the two world wars in the early 1920s. So he's also directly intervening on this, and he called it out, right? This age of pessimism that's spreading like a toxic poison, which is something that naturally occurred when all of these young idealistic people all were thrown into the meat grinder for 4 years of unnecessary trench warfare, right? It was really spiritually scarring for so many amongst that lost generation. And they all, like, people just really started becoming fertile soil for this type of poisonous nihilism and over materialism that just rejected quality in general, right? And ideals. All of that was seen to be an illusion. And science was proving that all we have are, lifeless atoms making everything up, and bestial impulses that somehow are at the heart of all of our motives for justice and the immortal. It's all just, base survivalistic drives, hyperrealism.
It could just as easily be applied to today. That's 100 years ago.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Years ago.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. And it's not amazing at the same time because, how can I say it? Cynthia wrote a piece on the fact that valor and wisdom would be the cures to the whims of fate. And precisely, as long as there's not enough valor and wisdom, fate will recur in cycles. And I think there's nothing surprising that what we are living now resemble very much to what was happening between, let's say, 1895 and 1914. And it's another cycle of fate, if you want. And it's not a surprise that in many cultures, the notion of fate is so strong, because it's simply reality as it is, without the creativity of the divine man, precisely.
When you lose that, you just have this absolute pessimism.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, I think that the fact, for example, that the planets revolves around the sun and the sun revolves around the center of our galaxy and so on, that circle image of physical reality, for me, is a kind of symbol of the circle of historical behaviors that can be understood as unconscious cycles of behavior, unless there is the eruption of tempus into chronos, chronos being the revolving behavior in cycles, and tempus precisely, which is the creativity of the God man, of the divine man, through precisely the practical operation is not a good word, but the practical activities of valor and wisdom, of higher activities.
Yeah, well said. I love this idea of civilization as being how he redefines the nature of what most of us think of when we say the word civilization. And by composing this, he sort of like sets up a bit of a punchline, because after several pages of just building these very, very juicy thoughts regarding quality, quantity, the nature of what inhibits our natural truth selves from coming into being, he then defines civilization as itself art. It is an art of civilization, that there is such a thing. And that, how does he word it? That the product, it's the product of the art of religion. But then you're like, well, what kind of religion is he talking about? But he already defined what the negative types of bad religions are, what they do, versus what he's been defining this whole time after like all these 8 chapters. He's trying to zero in on, well, what is this higher universal positive character of all of the best religion, all religions in general that have this this higher quality. They're all like tapping into something that's similar, but that civilization isn't art. I just love that.
Oh, but that's, I think I don't remember who said that, but I think many people said that in the past and in the future, I'm sure, that art is more real than what is called reality. Okay, because it's the same when Plato said that the ideas are more real than the phenomenal reality. Okay, it's the same insight, if you want, when someone say that art is more real than the phenomenal reality. It's the eternal Platonic ideas that has been repeated under many forms. And maybe there's a dance or dialogue between some lines of page 122 and some lines of page 126. Okay, there's no need to go to those pages unless you want. That's okay. Tagore was saying that the present is what limits the animal. Okay, and here I would like to stress one of the major misunderstanding when talking about meditation, precisely when the meditative man will speak of the now here and that there's only the present. He is not speaking of the animal present. He's speaking of the eternity, precisely, which is the intense concentration of tempus, including the past, the future, and the now here, okay, to avoid the word the present. And I agree with Tagore that the animal is imprisoned in the present, okay, because what is happening in front of him is everything. In front of it, everything. But the divine man is not in the present, he's in the now here, and the now here is a concentration of now here, past and future. So it's tempus, if you want, okay, the classical opposition between chronos, the measure times, like in chronology, of course, and tempus, eternity, which is the not the space-time, because there's no space-time, which is the abode of the eternal man.
Right. Right. It's sort of the illusory, like I'm used to thinking of the illusory infinite and the infinite, which you can only get by extending like a one-dimensional line forever into the future. And you can always have like an infinite plus one and keep on quantitatively adding it with no end versus, we were talking about, you're mentioning the circle and how the circle is a bounded infinite. You could always divide the circle, but it's bounded by the quality of the circle. It's a different idea. One you can wrap the mind around in a sense. It has a quality, and time is sort of like that too. If you think about just the now, there's that illusory now of like having that line where you can always just sort of like think of a line as a line of time, and you could always just sort of imagine that you could cut points out of it, but no matter what, you could always cut more and more lines. Like there's no end to how many points you could like zero down on. But if you recognize that each moment on that line is an expression of an entire process of all of eternity, all of future, all of the past expressed at every moment, it's a different mindset. There's a quality to it, which is what you're getting at there, I think.
Absolutely. It is the product of the art of religion. Absolutely. Religion, in the highest sense, is the art of religion. As Tagore said, I want to read that again. In other words, civilization is a creation of art created for the objective realization of our vision of the spiritually perfect. And as he said, the indomitable courage to be great and to go to that permanent illumination precisely. Very nice combination of words. Permanent illumination at page 121. Opposed to the mechanical spirit of tradition, because let's not forget that he was an Indian by birth, and he was seeing the decay of Indian civilization during his time. Okay, I'm not extolling the British Empire, but what happened in India, it's because precisely the Indians at the time were not in the mood of indomitable courage to be great. That's why they have been first conquered by the Mongols and the Turks, and after the collapse of the Mughals dynasty, by the British. And I think that Tagore was very courageous to write those lines because he was read by the elite of the Indians, and he knew who would read those lines.
Right. And I mean, it's pretty, I'm sure he was ruffling a lot of feathers, since he was also saying these words in Oxford when he was there to deliver these lectures, speaking to the elites, representing the interests of the British Empire. He was probably pissing quite a few people off in the audience.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But at the same time, I would say that it speaks also to the eternal man. Okay. All civilization which collapsed, the primary reason was never the outside people. The primary reason is because of the rotten elite inside the collapsing civilization.
Yeah, there are so many things I'm going to go back to and just write quotate. It's hard because every second sentence I want to like write and keep as a quotation, but the one that really I love this
all
is
the chapters, man. We can go line by line.
But the one that really got to me was so long as we have faith in this value, our energy is steadily and sustained in its creative activity that reveals the eternal man. This faith is helped on all sides by literature, arts, legends, symbols, ceremonials, by the remembrance of heroic souls who have personified it in themselves. And I think I'm going to use that in the introduction to this upcoming symposium that we're going to start in January. I'm going to include that in the write-up. It's really good.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? Should we go on, or any other thoughts before we go to the artist?
Well, the only thing I wanted to say earlier is that I think there was a class by Jerry Rose, and it was on Solon of Athens. And in that class, I think he either said it either came from LaRouche or Plato that political organizing was the highest form of art. And it kind of like touches back to what we were saying about religion being the product of the highest art or something like that.
Well, it's definitely reminiscent of Shelley's In Defense of Poetry, right? Which is that's sort of the theme that runs in and out of the entire essay as well.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that poetry means creativity by Greek etymology, poiesis.
Right.
So, Luke, have you finished?
Yeah, I had said my piece.
Okay. I just want to read again 7 or 8 lines, okay, from page 119, because it's precisely that deep intimacy between the 3 elements of personality, individuality, and universal self. Okay, it's at the end of page 119, the last 9 lines or 8 lines and 1 word. What I mean by personality is a self-conscious principle of transcendental unity within man, which comprehends all the details of facts that are individually his in knowledge and feeling, wish and will and work. In its negative aspect, it is limited to the individual separateness, while in its positive aspect, it ever extends itself in the infinite through the increase of its knowledge, love, and activities. Here, he's not using the word personality in a perfectly technical sense, but that's okay. He's truly speaking about that unbreakable dance dialectics between personality, individuality, and precisely universal self. But here he would use the expression in the infinite, which is a perfectly clear synonym for universal self. That's all for my small comment.
It's almost as if like it's like another way to say God or some like the anthropomorphic of God. Yeah. Because there is a reflection of the individual personality in a greater subsuming personality.
Yes. If you want, the animal man, which is the seed for the God man.
Well, it's the seed is a physical thing, so it makes sense. Yeah.
Well, definitely he. Oh, sorry, Quan. Yeah, go for it.
No, that's okay. Go on, Matt.
Yeah, the idea of this intrinsic subjectivity in the objective universe, so-called, has been a theme of a lot of the people we've been reading. It came out big in the writings of Max Planck that there's this universal personality that we're made in the image of, that the great anybody who's going to be fruitful in scientific work and break out of the shackles of pre-existing knowledge into something really qualitatively new. Max Planck was very clear. You have to have that sense that your individuality is inextricably tied to the facts you're analyzing, how the value you're imbuing into the facts, and the subjectivity of the universe, right? This idea of an ideal universal spirit. So there's this quality that Tagore is definitely aware of and is very sensitive to, that there's this intrinsic ideal divine subjectivity everywhere.
Absolutely. Or as LaRouche said, substance is efficient cause, and efficient cause is substance.
Mm.
That's the famous line from him that we read, I think 6 months ago, something like that, and which reflects again that how can I say it? That compulsory relations between God's grace and man creativity. Okay, to quote St. Augustine, when Jerry talked about God grace and man agape, we often come back to that basic relation, if you want.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, in that sense, this idea as well that of the harmonization quality that was it that within our passions and our faculties, there's no absolute pure good or evil in any of our perceptions and yearnings per se, but there's this question of harmonization, right? As he says, like there are chords that are played where there should not be chords, where they become dissonances, but it's all about the context. And I remember when we were reading Mencius, there was this discussion by the translator of Mencius, who brought up how a lot of people have a difficulty. They accuse him of being a relativist without principles, because he's like flexible, and in like certain situations something will be the right thing to do, and in other situations it will not be. And that doesn't make you a relativist if you have divine principles that are governing you, that are transcendental, but you're going to have the creative flexibility to know that there's no formula in the active material world of becoming for success. You'll have to be able to modulate according to the context. But again, it's not the relativist would be just anything goes, just win, you know. There's no justice, no evil, nothing, just win. Now that's not at all what Tagore or Mencius believe, because they actually do have a sense of the transcendental, divine, eternal, you know, unchanging world. But
yes,
yeah.
that's very interesting what you just said, because that's true that in the phenomenal reality we can be flexible, and that would give an image of a relativist attitude, which is not the truth, but it's only to be flexible in the phenomenal world, because that is the warp intimately in relation with the weft, which is truth, goodness, and beauty. And if you have your energy from that transcendental dimension of truth, goodness, and beauty, you have precisely the universal context. Okay, when you were speaking of context, what could be a more ever present context than the universal context of truth, goodness, and beauty? And if you work from that universal context, you can modify your phenomenal melody to an infinite variety of patterns.
Yeah. Can I bring something?
Yeah.
No. I mean, yeah.
Before I lose it, because I've been thinking about it for a few minutes now. When we talked about personality earlier, or not too long ago, I remembered the way LaRouche described a narcissist, or more specifically Obama. I think he was talking about being a failed personality. Now, this to me made more sense, what LaRouche had said, in light of what we had just discussed now, because a failed personality is what I'm getting. It would be not able to be an extension of the filial relationship with creativity.
Absolutely. That's the to use a family words, that would be absolutely a bad son. Absolutely. Okay. If you take the Trinity, okay, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, in that universal family, it's precisely to be a bad son than not to be in contact with God the Father, or if you want, the weft of the universe, truth, goodness, and beauty. Absolutely. That's a perfect universal, cosmic, dysfunctional family.
Yeah, the communication link is severed.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is precisely the art of religion, than to create again and again, generation after generation, that link to the cosmic dimension or divine dimension.
Yeah, whereas the narcissist who becomes a failed personality is somebody who's made their religion themselves without any of the rest of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
They lose sense of the big picture. But because we mentioned link, there's like the other image, which I think I want to throw in there in the discussion, that of the catenary. We've done in the LaRouche youth movement, we were doing a lot of work on the catenary. You remember, Matt?
Oh, sure, yeah.
And it's always been a difficult or very challenging, I should say. Why are people spending so much time and emphasis presenting what essentially is a hanging chain? But I suspect that there's a metaphorical as well as scientific implications that can be understood from it. It's very rich, because the chain is a series of links, and the links are always they're never in the same angle from one link to the next, so they're all unique, even though they're part of a greater whole. Each link gets to be an individual, or like an express and a unique expression. And so, and then we take the idea of context, and then the way you measure each one, you don't have a formula to know which is the link between the first and the second, or sorry, the let's say a 1 and then the number 3 with the number 2 in between. Let's say you're always going to have a relative consideration of the context of which one is before and where is it going.
Mm-hmm.
And so anytime you judge, like Mencius, we refer to Mencius, what used to work when he said it at that moment worked for that moment because it was that moment in time. But you can't just take a formula and just, but you said this. Well, now, I mean, they call it in situs.
Yeah.
In situs.
Well, you could think about it in a physical economic standpoint, that like it was great that we had windmills in the medieval ages to help replace human labor and do work, and that was great in the context of the age that it was located in as a technology. But if you try to take that technology 800 years into the future and place it today and put our entire society onto reliance on that type of thing, the context no longer works. It's now dissident, where formerly it was harmonic, and everything breaks down. So everything is, it doesn't mean that it's intrinsically bad, but it's bad based on an electric, industrial society with 8 billion human lives on the surface of the earth.
Well, it's out of context, okay?
Yeah.
And to remind the famous kairos, because we always think about space-time, okay? You have chronos, you have tempos, but you have kairos. Kairos is that famous moment between tempus and chronos, because chronos is the round of fate, okay? And tempus is the power of truth, goodness, and beauty. But there's something between the two, which is precisely kairos, or in Chinese, shu. And I remind you that I explained it in my presentation in the I Ching, but shu, which is a Chinese word for kairos, is written by a hand handling a ball with force, okay? But that force is not brute force, of course, but that is the force of the connection with truth, goodness, and beauty, the divine dimension.
Mm.
And because you have the force of the divine dimension, truth, goodness, and beauty, you will be capable to hand the ball, which is any problems or any situation, with intelligence, or maybe another definition of intelligence is precisely to be connected with truth, goodness, and beauty. So you will never be out of context precisely. Or common sense in the sublime meaning of common sense, as LaRouche explained.
Right.
Mhm.
Shall we go to chapter 9?
Absolutely. If not, we will discuss this chapter till the end of the world.
Which isn't always bad. Yeah. Okay, chapter 9 it is. Who would like to read this one? Luke, you feel like reading, or?
Yeah, let's try that.
Okay.
I've been out of practice. The fundamental desire of life is the desire to exist. It claims from us a vast amount of training and experience about the necessaries of livelihood. Yet it does not cost me much to confess that the food that I have taken, the dress that I wear, the house where I have my lodging represent a stupendous knowledge, practice, and organization, which I helplessly lack. For I find that I'm not altogether despised for such ignorance and inefficiency. Those who read me seem fairly satisfied that I am nothing better than a poet, or perhaps a philosopher, which latter reputation I do not claim and dare not hold through the precarious help of misinformation. It is quite evident, in spite of my deficiency, that in human society, I represent a vocation, which, though superfluous, has yet been held worthy of commendation. In fact, I am encouraged in my rhythmic futility by being offered moral and material incentives for its cultivation. If a foolish blackbird did not know how to seek its food, to build its nest, or to avoid its enemies, but specialized in singing, its fellow creatures, urged by their own science of genetics, would dutifully allow it to starve and perish. That I am not treated in a similar fashion is the evidence of an immense difference between the animal existence and the civilization of man. His great distinction dwells in the indefinite margin of life in him, which affords a boundless background for his dreams and creations. It is in this realm of freedom that he realizes his divine dignity, his great human truth, and is pleased when I, as a poet, sing victory to him, to man, the self-revealer, who goes on exploring the ages of creation to find himself in perfection. Reality, in all its manifestations, reveals itself in the emotional and imaginative background of our mind. We know it not because we can think of it, but because we directly feel it, and therefore even if rejected by the logical mind, it is not banished from our consciousness. As an incident may be beneficial or injurious, but as a revelation, its value lies in the fact that it offers us an experience through emotion or imagination. We feel ourselves in a special field of realization. This feeling itself is delightful when it is not accompanied by any great physical or moral risk. We love to feel even fear or sorrow if it is detached from all practical consequences. This is the reason for our enjoyment of tragic dramas in which the feeling of pain rouses our consciousness to a white heat of intensity. The reality of my own self is immediate and indubitable to me. Whatever else affects me in a like manner is real for myself, and it inevitably attracts and occupies my attention for its own sake, blends itself with my personality, making it richer and larger and causing it delight. My friend may not be beautiful, useful, rich, or great, but he is real to me. In him, I feel my own extension and my joy. The consciousness of the real within me seeks for its own corroboration the touch of the real outside me. When it fails, the self in me is depressed. When our surroundings are monotonous and insignificant, having no emotional reaction upon our mind, we become vague to ourselves. For we are like pictures whose reality is helped by the background if it is sympathetic. The punishment we suffer in solitary confinement consists in the obstruction to the relationship between the world of reality and the real in ourselves, causing the latter to become indistinct in a haze of inactive imagination. Our personality is blurred. We miss the companionship of our own being through the diminution of our self. The world of our knowledge is enlarged for us through the extension of our information. The world of our personality grows in its area with a large and deeper experience of our personal self in our own universe through sympathy and imagination. As this world that can be known through knowledge is limited to us owing to our ignorance, so the world of personality that can be realized by our own personal self is also restricted by the limit of our sympathy and imagination. In the dim twilight of insensitiveness, a large part of our world remains to us like a procession of nomadic shadows. According to the stages of our consciousness, we have more or less been able to identify ourselves with this world, if not as a whole, at least in fragments. And our enjoyment dwells in that wherein we feel ourselves thus united. In art, we express the delight of this unity by which this world is realized as humanly significant to us. I have my physical, chemical, biological self. My knowledge of it extends through the extension of my knowledge of the physical, chemical, and biological world. I have my personal self, which has its communication with our feelings, sentiments, and imaginations, which lends itself to be colored by our desires and shaped by our imageries, by our imageries. Science urges us to occupy by our mind the immensity of the knowable world. Our spiritual teacher enjoins us to comprehend by our soul the infinite spirit which is in the depth of the moving and changing facts of the world. The urging of our artistic nature is to realize the manifestation of personality in the world of appearance, the reality of existence, which is in harmony with the real within us. Where this harmony is not deeply felt, there we are aliens and perpetually homesick. For a man by nature is an artist. He never receives passively and accurately in his mind a physical representation of things around him. There goes on a continual adaptation, a transformation of facts into human imagery through constant touches of his sentiments and imagination. The animal has the geography of its birthplace. Man has his country, the geography of his personal self. The vision of it is not merely physical. It has its artistic unity. It is a perpetual creation. In his country, his consciousness being unobstructed, man extends his relationship, which is of his own creative personality. In order to live efficiently, man must know facts and their laws. In order to be happy, he must establish harmonious relationship with all things with which he has dealings. Our creation is the modification of relationship. The great men who appear in our history remain in our mind not as a static fact, but as a living historical image. The sublime suggestions of their lives become blended into a noble consistency in legends made living in the life of ages. Those men with whom we live, we constantly modify in our minds, making them more real to us than they would be in a bare presentation. Men's ideal of womanhood and women's ideal of manliness are created by the imagination through a mental grouping of qualities and conducts according to our hopes and desires, and men and women consciously and unconsciously strive towards its attainment. In fact, they reach a degree of reality for each other according to their success in attempting these respective ideals to their own nature.
It's adapting, or did you say adapting these respective ideals?
I'm sure I meant to say it. To their success in adapting these respective ideals to their own nature. To say that these ideals are imaginary and therefore not true is wrong in man's case. His true life is in his own creation, which represents the infinity of man. He is naturally indifferent to things that merely exist. They must have some ideal value for him, and then Only his consciousness fully recognizes them as real. Men are never true in their isolated self, and their imagination is the faculty that brings before their mind the vision of their own greater being. We can make truth ours by actively modulating its interrelations. This is the work of art. For reality is not based in the substance of things, but in the principle of relationship. Truth is the infinite pursued by metaphysics. Fact is the indefinite or infinite pursued by science, while reality is the definition of the infinite, which relates truth to the person. Reality is human. It is what we are conscious of, by which we are affected, that which we express. When we are intensely aware of it, we are aware of ourselves, and it gives us delight. We live in it. We always widen its limits. Our arts and literature represent this creative activity, which is fundamental in man. But the mysterious fact about it is that though the individuals are separately seeking their expression, their success is never individualistic in character. Men must find and feel and represent in all their creative works, man, the eternal, the creator. Their civilization is a continual discovery of the transcendental humanity. In whatever it fails, it shows the failure of the artist, which is the failure in expression, and that civilization perishes in which the individual thwarts the revelation of the universal. For reality is the truth of man, who belongs to all times, and any individualistic madness of men against man cannot thrive for long. Man is eager that his feeling for what is real to him must never die. It must find an imperishable form. The consciousness of this self of mine is so intensely evident to me that it assumes the character of immortality. I cannot imagine that it ever has been or can be non-existent. In a similar manner, all things that are real to me are for myself eternal, and therefore worthy of a language that has a permanent meaning. We know individuals who have the habit of inscribing their names on the walls of some majestic monument of architecture. It is a pathetic way of associating their own names with some works of art which belong to all times and to all men. Our hunger for reputation comes from our desire to make objectively real that which is inwardly real to us. He who is inarticulate is insignificant, like a dark star that cannot prove itself. He ever waits for the artist to give him his fullest worth, not for anything specially excellent in him, but for the wonderful fact that he is what he certainly is, that he carries in him the eternal mystery of being. A Chinese friend of mine, while traveling with me in the streets of Peking, suddenly exclaimed with a vehement enthusiasm. Look, here's a donkey. Surely it was an utterly ordinary donkey, like an indisputable truism, needing no special introduction from him. I was amused, but it made me think. This animal is generally classified as having certain qualities that are not recommendable and then hurriedly dismissed. It was obscured to me by an envelopment of commonplace associations. I was leastly certain that I knew it, and therefore I hardly saw it. But my friend, who possessed the artist mind of China, did not treat it with a cheap knowledge, but could see it afresh and recognize it as real. When I say real, I mean that it did not remain at the outskirt of his consciousness, tied to a narrow definition, but it easily blended in his imagination, produced a vision, a special harmony of lines, colors, and life and movement, and became intimately his own. The admission of a donkey into a drawing room is violently opposed, yet there is no prohibition against its finding a place in a picture which may be admiringly displayed on the drawing room wall. The only evidence of truth in art exists when it compels us to say, I see. A donkey we may pass by in nature, but a donkey in art we must acknowledge, even if it be a creature that disreputably ignores all its natural history responsibility, even if it resembles a mushroom in its head and a palm leaf in its tail. In the Upanishad, it is said in a parable that there are two birds sitting on the same bough, one of which feeds and the other looks on. This is an image of the mutual relationship of the infinite being and the finite self. The delight of the bird which looks on is great, for it is a pure and free delight. There are both of these birds in man himself, the objective one with its business of life, the subjective one with its disinterested joy of vision. A child comes to me and commands me to tell her a story. I tell her a story which is disgusted, of a tiger which is disgusted with the black stripes on its body and comes to my frightened servant demanding a piece of soap. The story gives my little audience immense pleasure, the pleasure of a vision, and her mind cries out, "It is here, for I see." She knows a tiger in the book of natural history, but she can see the tiger in the story of mine. I am sure that even this child of 5 knows that it is an impossible tiger that is out on its untigerly quest of an absurd soap. The delightfulness of the tiger for her is not in its beauty, its usefulness, or its probability, but in the undoubted fact that she can see it in her mind with a greater clearness of vision than she can the walls around her, the walls that brutally shout their evidence of certainty, which is merely circumstantial. The tiger in the story is inevitable. It has the character of a complete image, which offers its testimonial of truth in itself. The listener's own mind is eyewitness, whose direct experience could not be contradicted. A tiger must be like every other tiger in order that it may have its place in a book of science. There it must be a commonplace tiger to be at all tolerated. But in the story, it is uncommon. It can never be reduplicated. We know a thing because it belongs to a class. We see a thing because it belongs to itself. The tiger of the story completely detached itself from all others of its kind and easily assumed a distinct individuality in the heart of the listener. The child could vividly see it because by the help of her imagination, it became her own tiger, one with herself. And this union of the subject and object gives us joy. Is it because there is no separation between them? In truth, the separation between the Maya, which is creation? There come in our history occasions when the consciousness of a large multitude becomes suddenly illumined with the recognition of a reality which rises far above the dull obviousness of daily happenings. The world becomes vivid. We see, we feel it with all our soul. Such an occasion there was when the voice of Buddha reached distant shores across physical and moral impediments. Then our life and our world found their profound meaning of reality in their relation to the central person who offered us emancipation of love. Men, in order to make this great human experience ever memorable, determined to do the impossible. They made rocks, so to speak, stones to sing, caves to remember. Their cry of joy and hope took immortal forms along the hills and deserts, across barren solitudes and populous cities. A gigantic creative endeavor built up its triumph in stupendous carvings, defying obstacles that were overwhelming. Such heroic activity over the greater part of the Eastern continents clearly answers the question, what is art? It is the response of man's creative soul to the call of the real. Once there came a time, centuries ago in Bengal, when the divine love drama that has made its eternal playground in human souls was vividly revealed by a personality radiating its intimate realization of God. The mind of a whole people was stirred by a vision of the world as an instrument through which sounded out invitation to the meeting of bliss, the ineffable mystery of God's love call, taking shape in an endless panorama of colors and forms, inspired activity in music that overflowed the restrictions of classical conventionalism. Our curtain music of Bengal came to its being like a star flung up by a burning whirlpool of emotion into the heart of the whole people, and their consciousness was aflame with a sense of reality that must be adequately acknowledged. The question may be asked as to what place music occupies in my theory that art is for evoking in our mind the deep sense of reality in its richest aspect. Music is the most abstract of all the arts, as mathematics is in the region of science. In fact, these two have a deep relationship with each other. Mathematics is the logic of numbers and dimensions. It is therefore employed as the basis of our scientific knowledge. When taken out of its concrete associations and reduced to symbols, it reveals its grand structural majesty, the inevitableness of its own perfect concord. Yet there is not merely a logic, but also a magic of mathematics, which works at the world of appearance, producing harmony, the cadence of interrelationship. This rhythm of harmony has been extracted from its usual concrete context and exhibited through the medium of sound. And thus the pure essence of expressiveness in existence is offered in music. Expressiveness finds the least resistance in sound, having freedom unencumbered by the burden of facts and thoughts. This gives it a power to arouse in us an intimate feeling of reality. In the pictorial, plastic, and literary arts, the object and our feelings with regard to it are closely associated, like the rose and its perfumes. In music, the feeling distilled in sound becomes itself an independent object. It assumes a tune form which is definite, but a meaning which is undefinable, and yet which grips our mind with a sense of absolute truth. It is the magic of mathematics, the rhythm which is in the heart of all creation, which moves in the atom and in the different measures, fashions, gold and lead, the rose and the thorn, the sun and the planets. These are the dance steps of numbers in the arena of time and space, which weave the Maya, the patterns of appearance, the incessant flow of change that ever is and is not. It is the rhythm that churns up images from the vague and makes tangible what is elusive. This is Maya. This is the art in creation and art in literature, which is the magic of rhythm. And must we stop here? What we know as intellectual truth is that also not a rhythm of the relationship of facts that weaves the pattern of theory and produces a sense of convincingness to a person who somehow feels sure that he knows the truth. We believe, in fact, to be true because of a harmony, a rhythm in reason, the process of which is analyzable by the logic of mathematics, but not its result in me. Just as we can count the notes, but cannot account for the music. The mystery is that I am convinced, and this also belongs to the Maya of creation, whose one important, indispensable factor is this self-conscious personality that I represent. And the other, I believe it is also a self-conscious personality, which has its eternal harmony with mine.
And that's why an artist,
He's so fun to read.
he really is. And there's always this integral whole, the simple idea that always organizes each chapter that's contained as a part of a greater whole, which is the book. And he's always modulating each one in accordance with these higher ideas, because he planted the seed at the beginning, right? Which was this, what is an artist? and everybody has their definitions, but he starts from the standpoint of like, well, I'm pretty much, I don't know most of everything that's necessary to keep me alive. Like I don't know how to build a house. I don't know how to make my clothes. I don't have a lot of basic skills that would be considered by utilitarian to be like, useful, but yet people seem to find value in what I do as a poet or a philosopher, such that they are willing to, provide.
They don't let me die or
They don't
starve.
let me die. Yeah. Whereas if I was a bird and just wanted to like sing my melodies and not learn how to like, build a nest or anything, the other birds wouldn't really care. I'd be dead really quickly. So there's something about the species that I'm a part of, which is distinguished from the other forms of life we see in the biosphere. But what is it, right? Like what is this quality that and what is the purpose? Is there a purpose? Is there utility to beauty and the products of the artist, right? Or is it just something that we do to like entertain ourselves and otherwise artists are useless? Or is there really a justifiable intrinsic usefulness to art? And so he just weaves this whole composition around answering that question without directly saying the answer in a literal way, which is nice.
Well, I mean, I've never seen anybody answer the question, what is an artist? Which came so close to say, what is an artist?
Mm-hmm. Not at least doing it well.
I mean, it came alive to me as I was reading it about the statements of making things come alive to like there was a transcendence I felt when I was reading it, because I was captivated, as if I could imagine myself having like written this and felt what I was feeling reading it. But yet he wrote it how many years ago?
Almost a century.
And I don't know him. Like I never met him. You're right. Like, how am I linked to him?
By your spirit. By
Yeah.
your soul.
Yeah.
He could have written that 3,000 years ago, and it's eternally real. And someone will read almost the same thing in 1,000 years, and it will still be real, because that is something eternal.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess that's the key subjectively, right? If you subjectively lose contact, as he said earlier on in this, I think it was in this chapter, with like the civilization which loses the connection of the individual to humanity as a whole, to the whole that they're a part of, is relatively doomed if it can't get it back. I forget how he worded it exactly, but that was sort of what he was saying. And to the degree that we have a yearning and a concept and a love for this transcendental divine beyond our limited selves, we will resonate to the same thing that he resonated to, or that somebody who felt and understood this thousands of years ago, or thousands of years into the future. Though, to the degree that we have access to that individually, we will feel what you just felt, Luke, I think, and what we all sort of felt in reading him just now. As far as his artistic production was able to enhance that part of ourselves that connects us to the eternal harmony of this self-conscious personality. I'm
not sure, but I think that the lines you are referring to, Matt, is at page 134, and I will try to read the lines. His true life is in his own creation, which represents the infinity of man. Is naturally indifferent to things that merely exist. They must have some ideal value for him, and then only his consciousness fully recognizes them as real. Men are never true in their isolated self, and their imagination is the faculty that brings before their mind the vision of their own greater being. We can make truth ours by actively modulating its interrelations. This is the work of art, for reality is not based in the substance of things, but in the principle of relationship. Truth is the infinite pursued by metaphysics. Fact is the infinite pursued by science, while reality is the definition of the infinite which relates truth to the person. Reality is human. It is what we are conscious of, by which we are affected, that which we express. Then, when we are intensely aware of it, we are aware of ourselves, and it gives us delight. We live in it, we always widen its limit. Our arts and literature represent this creative activity, which is fundamental in man. And
Yeah. And the next paragraph is the one where he makes that explicit.
yeah,
Where he says their civilization is a continual discovery of the transcendental humanity. In whatever it fails, it shows the failure of the artist, which is the failure in expression, and that civilization perishes in which the individual thwarts the revelation of the universal.
yeah,
Macbeth?
absolutely. For reality is the truth of man, who belongs to all types. And the last line is interesting. And any individualistic madness of man against man with a capital M cannot thrive for long.
Right. Luckily.
Oh, let's say that long on cosmic scale.
Yeah, it's been hanging on for a little bit too long so far, but yeah, it's short-lived.
So, well,
Well, it reminds me of the Shelley poem Ozymandias. I can't recite it because I never memorized it, but you know, it's the person who's in the desert and he sees the ruins of a once great civilization, and there's this giant like statue of Ozymandias with a little poem saying, "I am Ozymandias, king of kings. Look upon me and despair," and it's all like in rubble, as just this tyrant's pathetic yearning for the immortal, which Tagore even takes a little shot at. But the real thing is not the material world. It's not an expression of our ego just hanging on. That's going to perish, which is, I think, all oligarchical systems. They're fundamentally rooted in a deep, just malignant, egotistical, almost like spiritual disease. And they probably yearn on some level. They do, I'm sure, yearn for immortality, but it's not durable. It's gonna, because it requires the crushing of everybody else's immortality. Huh? What?
No, I was going to say that I am going to defend a little bit the oligarchs but you said that the nutshell of the defense. Okay, they are yearning for something higher, and they are sincere in their endeavor.
But do they
but
know
since
what?
they don't, sorry.
Do they know what is higher?
Well, that's precisely the problem. Okay, I think that in their desire, the desire for the higher, but it's not good enough to have good intention. You need to have the right epistemological or the right axial epistemological level, meaning that you have to have access to that transcendental dimension or that divine dimension of truth, goodness, and beauty, and that that King of King precisely, he had that intention for glory, in the true sense of glory, but he did not have the axio-epistemological means to get access to that glory precisely, to create a civilization which is a continual discovery of the transcendental humanity precisely. And well, that's the history of fate precisely. When you wrote to Cynthia that valor and wisdom is the cure for the whims of fate, and all the history of man is a struggle between fate, which is Cyclos and Chronos, and the endeavor to reach to the transcendental kingdom, which is the true energy to be capable to go against the whims of fate precisely.
Cynthia wants to just share something that she has as an idea. Cynthia, what was your? Yeah, it was a great idea.
It wasn't.
Yeah. Here, just
No. It wasn't. It wasn't my idea. It's just Adam Sedia wrote a really good article on Shelley's Ozymandias, and he's making the point that it is about a tyrant, but if it were just a tyrant that was unjust, and all of this, but didn't accomplish anything great, we wouldn't really be talking about such a person, and such a person doesn't tend to rule for very long either. But Adam Sedia makes a point in his article that the reason why we're talking about Ozymandias like 3,000 years later or whatever it is because of the artist's portrayal of that history, which lingers on. And again, it just goes to show that the power of the artist is more powerful really than what this tyrant was able to have in terms of a long-term influence.
Absolutely. Why do you think that all kings and emperors need to have a kind of art associated with his name? Okay. Is Louis XIV of France remembered because he was Louis XIV of France for his conquest that he lost anyway before he died? Or because Molière, Racine, Lully, Corneille, Conbert, and all those people were around him? And he just became a kind of emblem for all those creators that were there because he gave them the material means to express their genius and their creativity.
What do you think, Jerry?
Oh, no, I'm thinking about the poem, Shelley's poem Ozymandias, because well, there was a group of artists in England. Shelley was part of it, and Keats were part of it, and I forget what it was they were discussing. And then they had a contest to write a sonnet about it, and Shelley wrote the sonnet Ozymandias, and Keats wrote the sonnet on first looking into Chapman's Homer. So it's interesting. They're both different, but this idea of I guess the idea of discovery. Anyway, I'm going to use Keats's poem in my presentation. That's what I'm thinking about. Whereas Ozymandias, you just see this statue that's left that doesn't really survive. But with Keats, it's the idea of the discovery that does survive. So there's a whole story to this contest anyway. I can't remember it now. I read it such a long time ago, but I remember that's the two poems came out of this. It was
I had no idea.
Competition. Yeah, it was a friendly competition. It's they were good friends.
Yeah, I really look forward to you shedding light on that. That sounds really. But yeah, that's interesting that the two were sort of born out of the same process. Because that's also a wonderful immortal poem where, yeah, if I recall correctly, he's associating how he felt when he first read this beautiful translation of Homer by Chapman, and how for the first time everything snapped together in a very clear way, and he relates it or likens it to an astronomer who makes a discovery of a new planet that swims into his ken, or Stout Cortez, who like looks out at the sea and sees like a new piece of land, but he's got this scientific relationship, right? That there's a quality of the same quality of mind making a leap into the unknown, into a discovery concept that you make in arts, is also what you make in. It's the same quality of action as what happens in the mind of an astronomer or an explorer, if it's a real discovery. And the way he's able to just like poetically express that so condensedly is yeah, it just ties you back to the idea of your relationship to the creator, to the divine, beyond. Something Ozymandias could never do.
Discovering new ideas, which is common to man. Though it's an individual discovery, it's common to everyone. We all have it in us.
Which struck me, this irony that seems logically absurd on the surface, that he says it's that we only access, how does he word it, that the diminution of our being allows, ironically, the connection to our true selves. So it's only by letting go of our sense of self in one regard that we have access to our true self, that we're connected to our true self. So you've got this concordance of opposing concepts that are happening in a lawful way, right? Because there's something about our ego that's more tied to our personal sense of self. What am I sounding like to others? What do I look like to others? All of these things only reinforce a very bad sense of self that disconnects you from your true deeper self, which is tied to the divine. So when you can do things that reduce that, you're more who you actually are in a happy state. It's a beautiful idea, which is, I guess, the role of great art is supposed to get you to leave yourself in a certain way.
To be exact, to leave your mask. The masks that have been indoctrinated into you, and that you believe at yourself.
Right.
Yes.
Ironic that the Greeks wore masks, when they were acting.
Yeah.
Which is helping you leave your mask, those
are clever people. Those are clever people.
They are. Next level.
There was also a physical reason why they wore masks, so that it would make the sound louder.
Right.
Because they didn't have microphones back then.
Right.
Exact.
It was a twofold purpose.
Twofold purpose.
Yes.
The second is the pursuit of the science.
What was that?
I said the second purpose is the pursuit of science. That's about fact.
Yes.
Yes. Circumstantial.
Well, that once again, let's come back to the Trinity: truth, fact, and the real. The real for us.
Yeah.
I don't remember at what page Tagore gave his very short but sublime definition of art. What is art? It is the response of man's creative soul to the call of the real.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
So we should all be artists.
Absolutely, absolutely. And
It's
I'm
not
grateful to
just
you.
the artist.
Oh yes. Well, I would say that
Well, that's the
I
thing.
don't remember
It's
in what. I don't remember in what movie there's that line when two person was speaking to each other. One said, "You look like a
who's on
comedian,"
first.
and the other one answered, "But we all actors." And the lady reply, I meant the famous ones." Okay, so I meant the famous one. But I think that yes, we all artists in the sense that we all need to have to give a response from our creative soul to the call of the real. But here I would I have a professional bias uh, because of the accumulation of mass that have been indoctrinated into us. The first step is precisely to remove those masks. And what is beautiful that you don't have to discard those masks, you can keep them. But you keep them, but you can be, now you're capable to use them in context and not out of context, because you now have the energy of truth, goodness, and beauty.
Yeah.
So the thing that have been indoctrinated into you, your mask, they will not disappear. They will still be there, but they will be put in order, and you will take it when needed. Well, you will take the one appropriate for the situation when needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Kwan's, you know, what you just said reminds me of a novel. Title, what's the title? The Rusty Armor of a Knight.
Yeah.
Yeah, have you read it?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So
I did not read it, but yes,
yeah.
but I understand what you mean. Okay,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
the rusty armor can be clean, put in the closet, and can be used when needed.
Yeah, so it's always a struggle, you know, between the real self and also the false self, because it's talking, I think Tagore is talking about art's essence of the real art is about the transcendental humanity. But humanity, I mean, it's so complicated because we all have the God's DNA in us, the divine DNA, but we also have the qualities from the animal kingdom. I remember the last time that we were, you know, like reading about Osho, right, about the divine melodies, talking about we also have that, you know, animal nature in us and quality in us. So it's also, that's why we always say that in humanity, half of the humanity is angel and half of the humanity is about the devil. So how you can, you know, transcend, how you can first recognize the evil quality in you, the mask in you, the indoctrinated mask in you. So the first is the recognition of that. And the second part is how you can find the right method or right ways to remove the masks. Because even though that you wanted to remove the masks, but if you don't have the right way, or if you don't have the way, right, and then you cannot remove them. So for me, the lesson that I learned most from that novel, The Rusty Armor of a Knight, is that because after you have been putting on that mask for too long, actually you forget about your real self, and you don't know what the real beauty is until one day someone like the saints, when they approach you and when they manifest the transcendental humanity, and then you can recognize yourself, the best part of yourself, in him or in her, so that you can make that connections. So I think that's we are all, in that sense, just like what Luke just said, we are all artists, but artists with different qualities. But do we know, like Skylark just asked, do you know you can go higher? But do you know which level you are at? And do you know you can go higher? And when you meet someone from a higher level, can you recognize it? And do you have the way to go higher? So there are so many, questions that can go with it. So that's why I also find this chapter very profound. Yeah, thank you. So just my 2 cents.
Right. For anybody to experience joy or a real emotion, there has to be a creative vision created in the mind of that person. And so in that sense, we know that everybody, we're all cut from the same cloth, in the sense that we're talking about humanity here, right?
Yeah.
Yes. But I would say that the music of the master that will give you the inner joy to be capable to remove your mask and to keep them as tools, used as needed, depends of what I call affinity. Some people would prefer Bach, others would prefer Beethoven, others would prefer Brahms. But what is important is that the music of Brahms, of Bach, and of Beethoven have the deep classical values in them, and that deep classical values will bring us precisely to the dimension of truth, goodness, and beauty. But the personal touch of each of them will be more in synchronicity with certain persons than others. I think that one of our, not duty, but one of our needs in life is precisely to find a musician that would be capable to play our instrument and to make us musicians also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in that sense, thinking of ourselves as an individual, but also the species as being an instrument which can be tuned more perfectly, that can be brought out of tune and more into tune, which requires always a tuner, right? That you have
A tuner.
Yeah, somebody who's walked the walk and has the insights to help yeah, tune the instrument.
And that's probably one of the most difficult thing on earth, but at the same time very easy, because when you meet your tuner, there's an inner harmony which happens spontaneously, which doesn't need many explanations. Some would find the tuners early in their life, others would find a tuner later in life. I cannot explain it, but that's a fact.
I just wanted to say
There's also
something.
something very subtle there. Sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
No, you go ahead, please. I don't want to.
Please do. You go ahead.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
For sure.
Well, I mean, I wanted to just share, these sorts of conversations awaken thoughts, right? So, what entered my mind based on the little back and forth, especially in regards to this question earlier on that Quan raised of the masks being not something which we necessarily discard, but that we can begin to utilize well with wisdom. Obviously, some people don't know the difference between their mask and their true self, and that's kind of sad. And I was thinking to myself, partially, and this goes back to the question of drama, and Shakespeare himself famously said, "All the world's a stage, and all of us are actors." Shakespeare was a tragedian, because how do you move from a situation where you think you are your mask versus you can wield and utilize your mask in a wise way? I think the role of the tragedy is very important. And at the very beginning of this particular chapter, Tagore had said that art allows even pain and tragedy, as he describes it, tragedy to be useful when it's freed from the real life consequences of what goes on the stage of a tragedy, right? Because people who have been through suffering, who've been through bad errors and have survived, often come out with a greater set of experiences where you could see a lot of wisdom if they choose to make a lesson out of it. But it's like, then do you have to go through these terrible existential experiences to come out with wisdom? Or no? But that's why you have art, right? So you can vicariously live through the tragic decisions made that result in something terrible, and even get a quality of joy out of having experienced that, again, knowing that nobody's real life was threatened, and sort of learn more about what happens when a fool who doesn't realize they are a fool on the stage makes a series of decisions based on their lack of self-knowledge, which results in their own destruction and the destruction of those who they care about, as in the case of Hamlet, or pick a tragedy, right? So you could come out as an audience member with a greater sensitivity to that quality within yourself, because there's a little bit of a Hamlet in all of us at some point, until we become more aware of it. And so from there, if you could see somebody who becomes more connected to their divine true self, utilize things like rhetoric, the art of persuasion, the art of speaking, acting, in a way that you would not see an Obama do. Because Obama, or somebody who's just gone through the schools of persuasion, like Gorgias in Plato's Dialogue, they've gone to the school of Gorgias. They've gone to the school of learning how to speak well and prettily in front of people to persuade the masses that you should be liked. They have no people like, he skipped steps. He went straight to persuasion without first discovering that what his mask was versus his true self. And you can compare that to somebody like a Martin Luther King Jr., who can also use rhetoric. He can also use the art of persuasion, but in a way which is qualitatively better. So that was my thought about the mask idea, and yeah, this question of how we're all artists, all actors in some way.
Yes, and the case you mentioned was for educational purpose, because of course Shakespeare was a great educator in the sense of to bring forth what is within, truth, goodness, and beauty. But it makes me think of another Elizabethan or Tudor character, which is Lady Jane Grey, okay, that famous queen for 9 days. And Lady Jane Grey has been forced to wear the mask of a Queen of England for 9 days because there were political interests around her. Her father and her father-in-law, I think it was the Duke of Northumberland, and her uncle, the Earl of Arundel. And this case, precisely when you said that on stage, there is no one's true life that is at risk. But in case of Lady Jane Grey, her life was truly at risk, and she was 16 at the time. Mm. And she was not very old, but old enough to have an evolved psychology. And according to her letters, she seemed to be a smart person. And she probably was a smart person. And I would say that I am surprised that no Englishman wrote a tragedy about her, because or there is a tragedies about her that I ignore, because it's truly a case of a tragedy where there is a true stake of the lives of someone, of Lady Jane Grey, and precisely in which that young person show the decisiveness that was lacking to the character of Hamlet, but at the end die because of the masks that have been forced on her, because she was too young and not powerful enough to go against the Duke of Northumberland and the Earl Arundel, who are her own family members. I think that here there is something truly deep in the reflection on uh, how mass can be forced on us, even if we have the divine transcendental kingdom in us, as in the case of Lady Jane Grey, if I understood her according to her letters, because she seemed definitely to be someone, even at 16, having the kingdom of truth, goodness, and beauty in her. But the tragedy ended with her death anyway.
And which was her life contained only in her letters, or was there a tragic play that you're saying was written portraying her life as well?
Is there a movie about her? Or?
Oh, there was not one.
Not at my knowledge. No, not at my knowledge, only from the historical letters, because in the last 2 weeks of her life, especially the 5 last days of her kingship or queenship, she locked herself with her supporters inside the Tower of London, trying to recover her crown, precisely, because let's not forget that she was struggling against the future Queen Mary, who was the daughter of King Henry VIII. So Lady Jane Grey was the niece of King Henry VIII and the cousin of King Edward VI, who named her as Queen of England when he died at 16 years old. So, but what I wanted to say that, according to me, I don't know any piece of tragedy that has been written about her, but she is a good case because what I understand from her letters, that she is someone with a connection to truth, goodness, and beauty, but having the mass of Queen of England, forced on her by precisely the whims of fate and the ambitions of the older members of her own family.
Fascinating. You have to write a play on this, Quan.
Yeah, it would be quite funny. Lady Jane Grey by Quan Lee. Yeah.
Can you send the name later?
Well, Lady Jane Grey, you can find many things about her on the internet. Grey is like color, okay? The Grey, Grey, Jane Grey. And she was a Tudor queen, ruling only for 9 days, from July 10, 1553 to July 18, 1553.
But I wonder if I may have some subtle, not definition, but maybe distinction here. I think we're talking about two things. The first thing is about the role. Like the knight, that's his role. Like me being a mom, that's my social role. Like Jane Grey, the queen, right? That's his social or political role, right? And the mask, mask refers to something that comes with that role. And then because of that role, and then you take on some qualities or some personalities or you develop some personal characteristics because of that role. So for me, the lady Jane Grey, and she she was entrusted with the role, but against her own will, maybe, or it was her will, maybe, I don't know. So, but she doesn't have the power to put on the mask yet. And she doesn't know, have the time to develop actually the power that comes from wearing that mask. So talking about the stage, I mean, about the comedy or tragedy, I think it's just something like just the opposite. So for some actors or actresses, like for them, actually the roles that they play is only roles. But sometimes they do not recognize that. They can put themselves, they would take that for real. So I forgot the name of the very famous comedian, the movie star, and who passed away a couple of years ago. And he was a comedian, but he, but he took on the role, but he could not, at a certain point, he could not draw the line between the role and his real life. And then gradually he was devoured by the power that came with the mask.
Well, yeah. On that note, I would just say that that's the I think the problem you tend to get with radical method acting.
Mhm.
Like there's this case of what's the guy who played in Daniel Day-Lewis. Thank you, Cynthia. Daniel Day-Lewis. There's this famous case because he's known to be a method actor, right? Where if you're going to play a drug dealer, a method actor has to just go for a few weeks and just hang out with cocaine addicts and do cocaine and just like immerse themselves into that. And he was playing Hamlet. And there's this famous story. The one time he decided to accept a stage play, not filmed, it was Hamlet. And he put himself into Hamlet's being to such an extent, he lost who he himself was. And he immersed himself in like, how would I feel if the ghost of my dead father who was killed by my uncle appeared in front of me? How would I feel? And he just like hypnotized himself doing this in his mind as a mantra for weeks and weeks until finally the moment came when he was acting now in front of the audience and he had the ghost of his dead father and he went through a panic attack and collapsed and fainted. And he vowed he would never do Shakespeare again.
Yeah, exactly.
He just totally lost it. So to be able to like both give yourself to another character while at the same time not losing who you are, that's something that you got to strike that balance. You got
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt.
But I think that it's part of human tragedy that sometimes certain mass pleases us so much, a certain role pleases us so much, that we are willing precisely to sell our soul, our true self, for that mass or for that role. And I would push things as far as to say it's part of the universal dance, and that is okay. I seems to be promoting unconsciousness, but it's not what I want to say.
Mhm.
I want to say that I think there are some people who love so much their role and are consciously loving their role. And it would be a tragedy for them to lose it. We were speaking of Louis XIV and of the artists surrounding him. It was well known that Louis XIV said that le métier de roi est grand, noble et délicieux. The profession of being a king is great, noble, and delightful.
Mhm.
Here we have a perfect case of someone conscious, because Louis XIV was a smart man. He was not the Gordon variety plutocrat or oligarch. He had some greatness in him. And he was perfectly aware, and I would make the hypothesis that he had connection to truth, goodness, and beauty. But at the same time, he was madly in love with the role that destiny gave him, being the king of France.
Mm-hmm.
I can agree more to that. I think human beings, sometimes we tend to overestimate our own capability. Sometimes we think that, like we can use the power to our own use, but at the same time, we're not aware that actually we are being enslaved and also imprisoned by the power that we think we can be the master of. Yeah.
Well, we either sell our souls to the devil.
Pardon? Can you say it again?
We can sell our souls to the devil.
Yeah, exactly. Until a moment, I think that's also why the power of the art, until that moment when you were touched by the beauty, by the almost beauty and the almost truth, and demonstrated or manifested in art, in a piece of art, and then at that point, like something clicked in your heart, and then your soul will have a chance, to be awakened. So it's either through the art, or through the teaching of the sages, or through there are many other ways. As Kwan said, we may have different affinity, right? For some people, the enlightening moment may come through a movie, but for some people, it may come from reading a sutra, right? Some people may be listening to music, but so I've never been an artist in my life, but I feel like I could start to become one from tonight. Thank you.
I'm sure you're an artist in many other things.
I think I should invite you for tea for Christmas. How about that? Does that sound a good idea? Sorry, Skylark, I'm talking to you.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, exactly. We have a great potential, but the real issue for me for years is really because theoretically we know that we have the divine nature and we have the transcendental humanity, but the reality is we have been indoctrinated with all different types of masks for lives and lives. So how can you make that starting point? How you can practice in your life, like to really upgrade yourself and, to regain the power of uplifting the mask. So for me, it's been a real issue for many, many years in terms of, again, borrowing Guan's term, the practicality thing. Yeah, so for me.
Well, the answer is love. If you're not in love with someone, offering you a way, because it's not the way which is important, it's the love, which is an infinite energy. So as long as you're not in love with someone offering a way, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but well, let's say it's my heartfelt answer. If you don't fall in love, or rather, if you don't ascend in love with someone offering you a way, I don't see a practical answer to that question precisely.
Wow, that will, if I start to talk, it would take me 30 minutes, half an hour. Yeah.
There's a really wonderful dialogue by Plato called the Proclus dialogue on the nature of love, and well, that at least that occupies a big part of it. The universal yearning to love, to give our love, and to be loved in return, and how that manifests. And it's a really fun. It's a bit of a long dialogue. It's really wonderfully constructed. But the thing that you sort of see fluttering about is the need to love oneself, because until we could see ourselves as both ourselves and the other at the same time, and then if you can't find love for yourself, it's very difficult to extend that beyond your own limits to other. And so there's this reciprocal nature, right, of going inward and outward at the same time. And when you make penetrations on the inside, you're then more able to have durable love going outside yourself too. And it sort of plays back and forth as a dynamic. It's really yeah. I mean, I couldn't do justice to it just talking about it like this. Maybe eventually we can incorporate that into our reading.
But Matt, speaking of Plato and love, the symposium is about love too. Okay.
Yeah.
And we have that character of Alcibiades, which is the archetype of the ambitious young man and supremely clever young man with all the talents possible given to him by heaven and earth, who was in love with Socrates, but apparently not enough to change his ways. And that is a truly awesome dialogue, because precisely we have here a king, okay, because Alcibiades is a kind of king, let's call him king. You have here a king falling in love with a philosopher king. But if we look at the practical results, his love was not intense enough, apparently.
It's funny that Matthew would say you have to love yourself before, because it's today I was telling a friend of mine, if she can't love herself, how can she expect others to love her? And I think that is very important.
Absolutely.
Yes, but the problem with Skylord is that Alcibiades thinks that loving himself is to go to the conquest of Sicily and not to know himself in the divine kingdom.
Yeah.
Okay, so it means, what do you mean to love yourself? To conquer Sicily or to be in the divine kingdom?
You have to like yourself first.
Yeah. No, exactly. No.
Yes, but what is liking or loving yourself? That's the question.
I think that the essence of the question is about the wisdom of loving yourself in a righteous and wise way. Exactly. Otherwise, we all love ourselves, but is our love enhancing our ego? Or is our love, like helping us to go upward? So it's about the wisdom of love.
Sometimes,
so for years, go ahead.
People don't go deep enough
to
the inner core. They only see the outer. And beauty comes from deep within.
I think we need role models in life, where you can see that they manifest the type of love that like the that can touch your heart, like the beauty of an art, and then you can.
Well, have you ever noticed that? Have you ever been so deeply in love that you can become so creative? Because it is love that causes creativity.
I have to say that today, I am someone who have been deeply loved. Otherwise, I wouldn't.
Yes, you have been deeply loved. Yes. But have you loved deeply?
Every day I'm doing it right now, just because when you are deeply loved, and then it's very natural for you to want to pass on that love to yourself first, and of course to your family members, and if possible, if you have that affinity with your friends, to your friends. Yeah.
I'd just say on the issue of Alcibiades quickly, his problem was, I think he skipped the step of coming to know who you actually are, because to love yourself, you have to first come to know who you are, which is the whole point of philosophy, is self-examination, right?
Yeah.
And it is wonderful, this symposium dialogue, because it does contrast a whole bunch of different individuals who all are at different states of development as they praise love. and some of them are far lesser developed than others. Alcibiades being, I think, the most out of control, like the most ignorant of his true self. And as Kwan, pointed out, if you look at his life, and I was Cynthia just wrote an article version, an essay based on her class on Plato's combat with the cult of democracy, where it makes very clear that Alcibiades, as a real figure in world history, was a rather big egotistical mess. He might have had a lot of potential to do good, but he certainly didn't make much of an effort to actualize it, although he admired Socrates, which is tragic. But then he went and made this tragic expedition militarily into Italy, which just annihilated the armies of Athens. And prolonged the Peloponnesian War by 13 years. Cynthia just reminded me. Total disaster. So if you have to really take the time to self-examine, which is why Socrates sets up in so many of his dialogues the idea of like the foundation for what he does in his academy, what Plato does in his academy, which is a true classical curriculum of education. Yet you want to be able to give students an ability to both study astronomy in such a way, as well as geometry, as well as music and gymnastics, in such a way that they're all gateways to better understand who you actually are in relation to something bigger. And then from there, you can love something deep about yourself, which is in the Socrates speech in the symposium. His speech on love is so much different from everyone else's, because he's the only one who zeroes in on the fact that love is not a thing unto itself. People all want love, they want happiness, but they don't realize that love and happiness are the effect of something else. It's not like you could just have happiness and have love as objects. It's you do something, there's a certain being that you tap into, and as an effect, when you actually yearn for and begin to actualize the immortal, the infinite, the effect is happiness, and love is something that goes with it, but it's not the thing unto itself as like a thing. It's a power, more than a thing.
Exactly.
So the course is to get to know yourself. So the closer you get to you get to your real self, the more happiness you will have, and the more love you'll know. Yeah. So that's the course in effect. I got it. Thank you.
Thank Plato.
As Shakespeare once said, all the world's a stage and we're the players.
Aye, 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 aye. Well, guys, this has been a lovely evening of philosophizing and just good soul food all around. I really thank everybody here for taking the time and just going through Tagore's soul with me and with everybody. This is really great. And I don't know, personally, I feel like we could just keep on next week reading Tagore. Is everyone okay with that?
Sure.
Absolutely.
I'm
Absolutely.
enjoying it.
Let's do that.
Yes, we should.
Okay. So we'll continue on next week with Tagore.
Yeah. So I also wish to take the opportunity to wish everyone a happy holiday season.
Okay.
Stay happy, and all the best wishes to you and your family.
Right,
Merry
likewise.
Christmas, all.
Merry Christmas, guys.
Happy birthday,
Merry
Matt.
Christmas.
Thank you.
Sorry, whose birthday is today?
When is his birthday?
Who's?
Well, it's not today, but it's almost today.
Oh, happy
Okay.
birthday! Look.
Happy
No,
birthday.
No, it's Matt's birthday.
No, it's
Oh, Matt.
Matt.
Sorry.
He's
Happy
born.
birthday, Matt.
He's not Jesus, but he's born on the 25th.
Not Jesus, but I wear his birthday.
See, your birthday is on Christmas Day?
He has the nature of Jesus. He's the transcendental humanity.
Yeah, I like Yang Hong. There we go. Okay, I'm gonna wear that as a t-shirt.
So your birthday is on Christmas Day?
Yeah, Christmas Day. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for
We should get
letting us know.
some special celebration, right? As a group, right?
He celebrates twice on that day.
I think so. We should
That was
find
my-
a way.
Yeah.
Again, okay, my tea invitation is always open. So
Okay, all
that's
right.
the only thing I can say, you know.
That's
And
cool.
at least to the ladies, okay? To Cynthia and to Skylark. Of course, it's also open to gentlemen.
That was Cynthia running away. Cynthia, say
Yeah.
goodbye.
Okay.
Cynthia, say goodbye.
Good
All
night.
right. Bye, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye
Good
and Merry
night.
Christmas.
Now.